Okay, so welcome to the Disenfranchised. Wes Barefoot, how are you doing today?
Ed, I'm doing awesome, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you very much. Other than the cold that I'm just getting over, as we've already just mentioned. But how are things
Yeah,
where you are at the moment?
things are good. It's probably, I don't know, similar to the UK. We're getting tons of rain today, but it's all good. We're kind of coming into fall, so humidity and the heat's on the decline, which is kind of a welcome reprieve from what's been a pretty hot summer. But things are good.
Yeah, well, in the UK, we've had our 1 week of summer. I mean, it's still kind of sunny now, but the temperature has dropped massively, man. So I'm looking forward to getting the radiator on, heating up, and yeah, and
There you go.
hopefully I'm waiting for that next summer to come around. But anyway, look, Wes, let's sort of dive straight into it and start
Sure.
off with your first job. So, what was your first job, kind of after education?
Yeah, so my first job after college was renting cars. I went to work for Enterprise Rent a Car. They had a management trainee program, and that's where everyone in the company starts. And so I got out of school in 2009. So here in the U.S. and really across the world, that was kind of uh, the the worst of the economic downturn that we had. And so not many companies looking to hire a kid right out of college with no real professional work experience. Enterprise was one of the few companies that was. They do require that you have a 4-year degree, at least here in the U.S., to get into this management trainee program, and that's what they do. They hire kids right out of school. It's hard work. It's long hours. It didn't pay very good, but I learned a ton, and I pretty quickly worked my way up to a management level where I had my own, branch that I was managing. So I got experience hiring, training, firing. I was paid in large part off of the bottom line of my branch. So I got to, learn how to look at a profit and loss statement and how to manage, the financials of the business. And so the other thing I really learned was how to deal with people, right? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
business where you literally have customers in your face all day long. And a lot of people were in there renting a car because they got in an accident and they weren't in a very good mood. And so you get to learn how to think on your feet very quickly. And so, while I learned fairly quickly into all that I didn't want to rent cars for my whole life. I did learn a ton that I've been able to carry with me into any other professional role that I've had since then, as well as just, I think a lot of good life skills. So I look back at it now and it's one of those things. Glad I did it. Glad I'm not still doing it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You've painted that as a really awesome kind of start, really, and in terms of the skills that you've learned from
Yeah.
being part of that management program. And I don't know, it's like in the US, but maybe kind of car sales or car rental isn't kind of that glamorous an arena to be working in. But
No.
I can see real value in what you did there. But I have to wonder, was it something you wanted to do initially? Was it an industry or a role that you want? You're shaking your head.
No, no, it wasn't. I mean, I definitely didn't grow up, aspiring to rent cars. It was a combination of two things. It was one that, they were one of the few companies at the time looking to hire, kids right out of school. We were kind of in the midst of the Great Recession. And so opportunities were limited.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I was chasing a girl who is now my wife. So that kind of led me to Enterprise too. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't glamorous, but it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, and it was a great culture that they have there at Enterprise. It was very a very team oriented culture, competitive, very fast paced. So there was a lot of things I enjoyed it. I met some great people. I had some great mentors. Let's see, 3 of the guys in my wedding are guys that I met, working at Enterprise and I'm still friends with now. So, again, I wouldn't change it for anything. I'm in a very, very different line of work now. But I wouldn't change that experience for anything. I learned a
Sure.
lot and met some really cool people.
Yeah, that sounds great. So where did your career take you from there?
Yeah, like I don't know, a very different direction. So I was living in Louisiana, here in the U.S. at the time that I worked for Enterprise. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, she was finishing up college in Louisiana. We're both from North Carolina originally. That's where we live now. So, and that's where our parents were and our family was. So, when she graduated from college, we decided to move back to North Carolina. I was able to transfer with Enterprise, but the way they kind of had it structured, I had to take several steps backwards in terms of my position in the company. So we got back to North Carolina, and I just, by that time, I'd realized, this wasn't what I wanted to do long term. It was nice to be able to like keep the job while we moved. So when we landed, I had some income, but I kind of started looking for other opportunities pretty quickly after we got back to North Carolina. And to make a long story short, I met a couple of guys that had just founded well, they founded a business a few years prior. They had just started franchising the business.
Okay.
It's a company called 101 Mobility, based in Wilmington, North Carolina, where we live now. Met one of the founders. We kind of hit it off. He told me about the company. It sounded interesting. I knew absolutely nothing about franchising, but he was like, hey, we're franchising this business. We're growing pretty quickly. We need young, hungry people to come help us grow this thing. And I'm like, I'm in. I don't know anything about it, but I'm in. Eventually, got into a franchise development role. So I was kind of the guy talking to people all over the country that were interested in potentially investing in that business as franchise owners. So I kind of got to learn what that whole process was like. What is the due diligence that someone needs to go through to get comfortable investing in a franchise business? The other thing it really opened my eyes to was the benefits of business ownership. And I started to realize that, hey, I could actually be a business owner, and franchising could actually be a great way for me to become a business owner. I mean, I was all of a sudden surrounded by these very entrepreneurial minded people, talking to people all over the country. Many of them already had businesses, and they were looking at this particular franchise as a way to maybe diversify or expand their portfolio. And so, just the world that I found myself in really opened my eyes. And so that experience led me to work for one other franchisor, in the same kind of franchise sales and development role. And again, the more I'm doing this, I'm helping people get into business for themselves. The more, and by that time, my wife, we saw ourselves being business owners. We wanted to own our own businesses. And so that second franchisor I went to work for is a company called Shelf Genie. We actually ended up becoming franchisees with Shelf Genie, and we still are. My wife was in pharmaceutical sales, and she got caught up in a big layoff that her company did. They laid off about half of their sales force across the US, and she was included in that. And so that put us in a position where, we were evaluating our opportunities. I'd been working for Shelf Genie. I'd been helping other people become franchisees. And I just saw the business being a really good fit for us. The area that we lived in, the territory was available. And so we did it. It was scary. We just had our first kid. But we saw firsthand how, I think what a lot of people feel is that, having the corporate job with the salary and the benefits, they view that as being much more secure and less risky than something like starting a business. And there's no question that starting a business is very risky.
Sure.
But we saw firsthand, and we learned how putting all of your livelihood in the hands of an employer is also very risky. Because my wife got laid off, and she was a top performer. They had her on a management track. It wasn't like she, got laid off because she wasn't performing well in her role. She was actually on maternity leave when she got laid off. And it was because they had several drugs in their pipeline that did not get FDA approval. right? So,
Right. Yeah.
so something completely out of her hands resulted in her losing her job. And so that experience, I think, kind of opened our eyes to the fact that, yes, starting a business is risky, but as a business owner, you maintain much more control of your livelihood than you do as an employee. And we didn't want to be in that position again. So we took the plunge. We started our Shelf Genie franchise. At that time, I was still an employee of Shelf Genie. I was working for the corporate entity and still doing their franchise sales. I went on to do that for, I think, another almost 2 years after we became franchisees. So I kind of had one foot in both worlds, right? One foot in as an entrepreneur, one still as a W-2 employee. My wife was kind of full-time running our Shelf Genie franchise. And she's done an amazing job building that business. She gets all the credit for the success that we've had in that business. And so as that business really grew and got to a point where we had good, steady income, it put me in a position where I could really kind of step back and evaluate, all right, what do I want to do next? I really enjoyed, working in franchise development for the brands that I worked for. But at the end of the day, I was still an employee. The other thing that was frustrating to me was I would connect with some great people that were, looking at the franchises I represented, but we would, discover for one reason or another that the brand I was representing was not a good fit for them. It could be territory, it could be the business model just wasn't quite right. I mean, any number of things. But once we got to that point, I was at the end of the road in terms of my ability to help them. And so through all that experience working with these franchise brands and doing franchise development, I learned about franchise consulting, right? So a lot of the ways that I would get connected with people that were interested in learning about the brands I represented was through franchise consultants. And so here in the US, a franchise consultant is very similar to, you can think of it as a real estate agent or maybe an executive recruiter. A franchise consultant is an independent contractor. They're not employed by any particular franchise brands, but they have relationships, usually with hundreds of brands. And then they connect with people that are interested in exploring franchise opportunities. And if a franchise consultant is doing their role right, they spend a lot of time getting to know the individual that they're working with. They should have a very thorough process that they take someone through. And that process should be designed to help someone really get clear on, number one, why do they want to own a business? Number two, what type of business model is best suited for them? And number three, what is their ideal role as a business owner? How do they want to spend the majority of their time as a business owner? And after they've done that, then the franchise consultant should be able to narrow down a list of franchise brands that really line up with what the individual's looking for in a business, and that's going to be a good fit for them. Then make an introduction to a representative from the franchise company, and then the franchise consultant should be kind of guiding them or coaching them through that whole investigative process. So I worked with a lot of these consultants and always kind of saw it being something that I thought I would really enjoy doing. I thought it would, play well to my strengths and my skill set. So that's what I ended up doing. I resigned from Shelf Genie and started my own franchise consulting business, which is where I spend most of my working time today. Path to Freedom is the name of the business. And I really love it. I connect with some amazing people, and I get to spend a lot of my time, researching businesses, talking about franchises, and it's something that's very rewarding to me. We've since gone on to start a second franchise business ourselves. So we're franchisees with two different brands. And that's a big part of our long-term strategy, is continuing to invest in and own franchise businesses. And so that's, I know, a long-winded answer to your question, but I figure I'd go ahead and kind of run you through everything up to present day.
No,
right
that's
there
cool.
in
That's cool.
one.
It sparked about a million questions in my head, so hopefully I can remember them all.
All right.
I think the first one that was interesting to me was you said that it was scary starting that franchise, that first franchise that you had, that Shelf Genie.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder
Yeah.
what was the most scary part of that, because obviously you had a bit of an understanding about the franchising world by this point, right? But still, there's some fears in there.
Yeah, no doubt. It's good point, right? Like we probably knew more coming into it than most people would because of my experience working for the franchisor. I think what was so scary about it, and I think this is the case for pretty much everyone that does something like buy a franchise. I think it's fear of the unknown. I think it's that, none of us have a crystal ball. None of us know exactly how things are going to pan out. For us at the time, we had a young daughter. That was our first child. So we were adjusting to becoming parents, still trying to figure out how to keep this tiny human alive. And we'd just gone down to a one income household, where before we were a two income household. Yeah. And then you throw in investing a significant amount of money in a franchise to start that. At the time, I mean, it was literally our life savings that we put into that. And then some, right? So I think it was just fear of the unknown, but it wasn't debilitating fear. It was fear that we felt, we acknowledged it, but we had confidence in ourselves that we could execute. And that's what, gave us the courage to move forward with it. And, that's something that we can maybe dig into a little further throughout the conversation, because, in my line of work as a consultant now, everyone experiences fear. And when you're going through something like this, it's how we're wired, right? As soon as you start to step out of your comfort zone and do something new and different, fear alarms start to go off everywhere in your mind. And it unfortunately holds a lot of people back from ever, really investing in themselves and going into business for themselves. And not everyone should be a business owner, but I've seen too many people not take the leap because of fear when they should have taken the leap. And they will spend a lot of their remaining time regretting the fact that they didn't bet on themselves.
It's like going on a roller coaster, right? You probably jump off if you weren't strapped in, but actually the payoff is worth it once you get there. But you said there's something that was really poignant, that you and your partner actually had confidence in yourself. And I think that's the difficulty for a lot of people, is how do they find that confidence? Where can they look within themselves to find that confidence? And I know from the people I've spoken to, it's difficult. They just kind of start to get bogged down in the numbers and the figures and saying, well, how are you going to guarantee that I'm going to be successful? And I know there's no way that company can do that. It's down to the individual. So how did you guys find confidence in yourself?
Yeah, it's a good point. And you're exactly right. The in this case, the franchisor is never going to be able to guarantee success, because they don't have any control over how, you as the business owner are going to operate. That's you, right? So yeah, I mean, I think for us, it was a combination of just kind of looking at our track record up to that point. If we were really being honest with ourselves, I can remember my wife and I having this conversation. It was like, hey, what have we both set our minds to and really gotten behind, and what have we failed at? And there really wasn't anything, right? So, individually, we'd both been pretty successful in our professional, lives. We'd, been promoted in any role that we'd had. We'd, had a track record of success professionally, but we also knew ourselves well enough at that point in time to know that, when the two of us were both locked in on the same goal, nothing was going to stop us. And we were kind of at a point where, we burned the boats, right? I mean, we got a brand new kid. We're wiping out the savings account. We're taking out a loan. Like, we're going to do this, and not being successful is not an option. And so that fueled us. Right. And, some people, some people, maybe that's not the case, right? It's like, yeah, I could do this, and if it works out, that'd be great. But if it doesn't, it's not like the end of the world. I think for us, at that point in our lives, that was just fuel, man. And it really drove us to make sure we were successful. But I'll tell you this, the other thing, and this is what I advise, the people that I consult with is, if you're investigating a franchise, you absolutely must talk to other franchise owners, talk to other people that are already in the business, and you're going to learn a lot from them. And they're going to help you with, crunching the numbers and calculating what you think your ROI can be. Because again, the franchisor can't guarantee any of that, but you can talk to franchisees and learn from their experience, and they can share their numbers with you. But any franchise is going to have a bell curve, right? You're going to have top performers, underperformers, everything in between. And you should talk to people in all of those categories. Of course, you want to talk to top performers, right? Because they're crushing it and you want to learn from them. But you should also want to talk to underperformers, because you're going to learn from them. You may be learning what not to do, but you're going to learn from them. Talk to some people that are kind of middle of the road, average players, or maybe they're just getting started. You want to talk to like a wide variety of franchise owners, because you're going to be able to learn different things from all of them. But assuming you've talked to multiple top performers, multiple underperformers, chances are you're going to be able to draw some pretty distinct conclusions in terms of what separates those top performers from the underperformers. All right. So once you know, all right, this is what the top performers are doing, and this is why they're successful compared to the rest of the franchise owners, that's when it's time to look yourself in the mirror and get really honest with yourself and say, okay, I know myself. I've learned what these top performers in this business are doing. Do I have what it takes to operate this business in a similar manner to these top performers? And if the answer is yes, that should give you confidence to move forward. If the answer is no, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's not the right franchise for you, because we all have the ability to learn and get better and improve on things. But for some people, if they go through this exercise I just described, they may realize, hey, this is actually not the best franchise for me. It doesn't really play to my strengths and my skill sets. And if that's the case, great. At least you learned that before you committed. Now let's go find another franchise that does play to your skill sets better, that you're going to have a much better chance of being a top performer in that franchise.
That's really interesting, because I think a lot of people that speak to the franchisees, right, it's fairly common practice. A franchisor should be open enough to allow you to speak to some of their franchisees. But I think people typically ask pretty non-informative questions, right? So how do you find the franchisor? Well, look, if it's a good day and the franchisors help the franchisee, they're going to say, yeah, they're great, they're supporting me. If somebody's perhaps not making it successful, that you know the answer you're going to get there. But actually thinking about, okay, what is it you're actually doing operationally on a day-to-day basis that is making you successful? And then comparing that against, can you do that, or have you done that in the past? Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense to me. And I can see how that can help you to have confidence in yourself. If you're let's say you're a salesperson and the role is all about hitting the numbers and getting out there, talking to people, promoting yourself, and that's what the top performers are doing in this brand. Well, sure, look, you can probably make a good fist of it, which is it's really interesting. But perhaps somebody who's more, I don't know, more administrative and more kind of hands-on management, perhaps that's not going to suit them, right? But yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it, because I always wonder, what if I was in that situation, what would I be asking the franchisees?
Yeah, and there's so much, right? And so it's a good point, right? I see way too many people. It's all fluff, right? They ask, kind of the basic top of mind questions, and I've seen a lot of people ask like yes and no questions too. It's like, you want to ask good open-ended questions. You want these franchise owners to talk. And here's the other thing. And you're exactly right. Any good franchise should not only encourage you to speak to their franchisees, they should require it, right? No good franchisor in their right mind is going to sell a franchise to someone if they haven't validated with some of their franchise owners. There are ones out there that will do it, but a good franchisor that really gets it isn't going to let that happen. They're going to require you to talk to franchise owners because you're able to learn so much from them. But there's definitely an art to having that conversation the right way so that you get maximum value from it. And so with my consulting clients, I spend a lot of time, working with them to make sure they're prepared going into these. We call them validation calls.
Sure.
I spend a lot of time working with them. I've created resources with examples of topics and questions and how to phrase questions the right way to make sure they're getting the information that they actually need to make an educated decision. And the last thing you want to do is go into one of these, usually it's a phone call. You don't want to go into one of these phone calls unprepared. Because look, the franchisee's running a business, right? They're busy people. And so they're doing a huge favor to you by spending time helping you understand the business. So you want to make sure you're prepared going into that. And you don't want to ask the franchise owners questions that the franchisor can answer.
Yeah.
Get that from the franchisor. Talk to the franchisees only about things that you can learn from a franchisee.
Yeah.
So
no
there's
point
a lot
asking
that
them
goes
about
into
tools and things like that, is there? Like tools and quality of the products and things like that. You can get that from the franchisor for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And you can maybe validate some of these things, right? So if it's a franchise where you're selling some sort of a manufactured product, franchisors likely going to tell you it's a great product, quality is amazing, right? So maybe you want to validate that with the franchise owner, but you probably don't want to spend as much time there as you do on the franchisee's financial performance, right? Where they can actually share some specific numbers with you, and that's where a lot of people want to go, and when they're talking to franchise owners, and you absolutely should, because again, the franchisor, they can't guarantee you anything. They can't say, hey, if you invest in this business, this is how long it'll take you to break even. This is what you can expect your net profit margins to be. They can't guarantee it, but the franchisee can say, hey, this is how long it took me to break even. This is what my net profit margins were last year. This is how much I did in gross revenue, et cetera, et cetera. So that's naturally where a lot of people want to go in those conversations, which is great. But there's other topics that probably get overlooked too much that are, in my opinion, just as valuable to talk to franchise owners about.
Yeah, definitely. And you've got that unique perspective, right? Having worked on, well, I was going to say both sides, but probably like 3 or 4 sides now of the franchising world, right? So what do you think about the relationship between franchisor and franchisee? So I've typically thought maybe you need to have a good relationship because you're going to face challenges that you both need to work through and together. I spoke with a franchisee the other day from expense reduction analyst brand I do some work with, and he said actually he didn't get on with the country manager that he joined. He joined the business knowing he wouldn't get on with this guy, and I thought, actually, why did you do that? But he had some trust elsewhere in the business. But how important do you feel that relationship is between franchisor and franchisee?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I do, right? Because it's a partnership at the end of the day, right? So you enter into a partnership, you want to at least feel confident that it's going to be a healthy partnership. That being said, I would agree with the franchisee from ERA. It's not necessary. Like, it's not necessary that you're best friends with the franchisor. Now, so I don't know. It depends on like what's the reason behind, hey, maybe we're not going to get along. If it's just a personality thing, as long as the franchisor's doing what they should be doing to support the franchisees and it's a viable business model, then, if you're not going to be best friends with the franchisor, that's not a deal breaker for me. But so I think it really comes down to what's the reason that maybe you're not going to, feel all lovey-dovey about your franchisor. Because the way I look at this is, as I said, it's a partnership, right? But there's a value exchange, right? If you're buying a franchise, you're paying a franchise fee up front to become a franchisee, but you're getting something in exchange for that, right? Maybe you're getting a territory, you're getting access to the system, right? The training, the support, access to the brand, everything that a franchisee has access to. You're also paying ongoing fees as a franchisee, usually a royalty. Sometimes there's some other fees involved. You're paying those on an ongoing basis. There's a value exchange there. You should be getting more value in exchange for your royalties or your ongoing fees from the franchisor. And different franchisors add value in different ways, depending on the type of business that they're in. So for me, that's really what it comes down to is, can I clearly see that I'm getting more value than what it's costing me in ongoing fees? If that's there, then it's a viable franchise, assuming that everything else validates and checks out, right? That you can actually make money in the business and so forth. As long as all that checks out, then I don't think it's as necessary that, you're like best friends with your franchisor. It certainly helps if you are. But I'll tell you, a mentor of mine, we're franchisees in one of the same systems together now. And he's owned 6 or 7 different franchises over the course of his career. He said something to me that's really stuck with me. He said, the franchisor can't keep me from being successful. They can only help me be more successful.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing for people to grasp, because I see it far too often where people come into a franchise and they get frustrated real fast because they were thinking the franchisor was going to do all the work for them. And that's not how it works. You still have to do the work. The franchisor is there to give you the systems, the processes, and some resources to go do the work, do the work smarter instead of harder, but they're not going to do it for you. They would just have all company owned locations if that's what they wanted to do. And so, I think keeping that in mind will save a lot of frustration and probably not put as much tension on that franchisee relationship.
Sure, and I think that's a really common misconception people have, right? In the UK, in the franchising world in the UK, a lot of people tend to use the phrase "business in a box," which I think can be a little bit misleading, right? You just buy this box and all of a sudden your business is operating, when, in reality, you've still got to go out there and promote the business, still got to run things efficiently and in the way that the operations manual is telling you. But there's only one person who's going to do it, and that's you at the end of the day.
The best, I'll share this quickly and then we can move on if you'd like, but the best analogy I've ever heard for the franchisor relationship is think of it as a bicycle, right? So it's the franchisor's job to build the bike, right? And so there's all different types of bikes out there, right? There's racing bikes, there's mountain bikes, there's beach cruiser bikes, there's a wide variety of bikes. The franchisor's job is to build the sturdiest, nicest bike that they can, right? So if you're shopping for a bike, maybe you want something that's really sleek and it's got all the bells and whistles and, really nice tires and, whatever the qualities are that you're looking for. But if you find the perfect bike for you, guess what? That bike doesn't go anywhere unless you get on it and pedal it, right? So that's the franchisee's job, is to pedal the bike. And the harder and the faster you pedal, the further and the faster the bike goes, right? So you could have 2 people with the exact same bicycle, and one of them barely goes anywhere and falls over, and the other one cruises for miles and miles and miles, and it all has to do with the rider, the person that's on the bike pedaling it.
Yeah, I guess if somebody's sitting there pedaling it backwards, they've not followed the operations manual, maybe, they're the ones that are falling off. But somebody who reads that operations manual, follows what the franchisor tells you to do, how to change gears, those kinds of things. Yeah, it's how you're going to get to the top of that hill, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I really like that. And strangely enough, it ties into a service that ERA offer, which we call Power Assist. So it's like an electric bike, right? Where we do the marketing, for them, which is Really strange that those two things have come together, but pretty cool. But
That is cool. I like the ERA business model. By the way, that's a really cool business.
Yeah, it's for me, it was something that's completely different to any other franchise that I'd ever heard of. Before I found the franchising industry, you got the McDonald's, Burger Kings, Subways, and you kind of aware of those, right? And then you start digging deeper and you find the kids activity franchise brands, and then maybe some of the man in a van type brands. Mm-hmm. And actually there's this whole white collar world out there as well that's got some very smart, intelligent processes built in. So yeah, but I'm not going to talk about ERA all day today. But what I did want to find out from you is, so in researching kind of your background and what you're doing right now, so you've got two franchise brands that you now own a license for. You have your podcast and consulting business. You're a busy guy, right? How are you stacking these things one on top of the other? I mean, the reason I'm asking is in the UK, there's not really this kind of mindset in the franchising world, that I've experienced. Okay. So maybe I've only had experience a little bit, but where you stack multiple brands one on top of another and manage them yourself. So how are you managing to find time and the ability to have 2-3 businesses operating at the same time?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I'll start off by saying, I definitely don't have it all figured out. I'm still learning every single day, making mistakes every single day. There are days where, I kind of look at everything I've got going on and I'm like, this is freaking crazy. We've got 2 young kids as well. So yeah, it's chaos, but we're doing what we like to do. Right. And so I think that's important. But the way we're doing it is, this is my wife and I together in this, right? So everything we do, I mean, she doesn't do the consulting that I do, but I mean, big picture, we're in this together. Everything we do, we look at as a partnership, right? So number one is we've kind of learned what we're good at, right? And fortunately, we have a complementary skill set. And so we're not perfect at it. We're getting better at it, but we try to kind of stay in our lanes while communicating very well with each other. And so that kind of gives us the ability to divide and conquer.
Sure.
So, but our Shelf Genie franchise, that's her baby, right? She's built that thing from day one. She's got a great team in place. She's got it running like a well-oiled machine. I don't really have to do much in that business. I always joke, but it's kind of true, is like, I only pick up heavy things and move them where she tells me to. That's about the extent of what I do in that business. The second franchise that we bought, so we started that earlier this year in 2021. It's called Koala Insulation. We have a general manager, right? Because we knew, and I'll talk more about why we like the idea of kind of stacking these franchises, because we're not done yet. We plan to do at least 3 or 4 more of these over the next 10 years or so. But we knew, hey, if we're going to do another franchise at this point in time, we've got to find one with the right model. We've got to find one with a model that allows for a general manager, because neither of us have the bandwidth to be in there running this business day to day, especially in the ramp up phase, really getting the business established. And so that was a criteria for us. Any business model that did not allow for a general manager, meaning the economics wouldn't work, right? The economics wouldn't support the additional overhead of having a full-time manager in place from day one, was not going to be an option that we looked at. So that's kind of how that business goes. So that puts me in a position where the vast majority, I'd say probably 85% of my working time, I get to spend on my consulting business, which, I kind of include the podcast under that umbrella, if you will. And that's at this point in time, that's what I enjoy doing most. I feel like I'm able to help a lot of people through that. And it is a business for me, right? So for us, the attractive piece of building businesses, and in our case, wanting to build multiple businesses, is, we like the freedom that it gives us, right? And it's not freedom, at least yet, in the sense that, like, we can go lay on the beach all day, but we're interested in building businesses that can work for us even when we're not working, right? And so like our shelving business is a good example because we've had that the longest. As I mentioned earlier, my wife has got an amazing team in place. We could go on vacation for 2 months if we wanted to, and that business is going to keep on humming and it's going to keep on generating income for us. We're not there with the insulation business yet because we're only barely 6 months into it, but that's the same vision, right? Any franchises that we add going forward will be franchises where we have the ability to build teams and delegate, and they will put us in a position where we can work on the business instead of in the business. And so to do that, it really just takes, having the ability to find and keep good people and empower those people. And so anyways, I can dive into more of that if you'd like, but that's kind of how we have it structured. And I'll reiterate, we don't have it all figured out. We make mistakes. This is something that we know we need to continue to get better at is building these teams so that we can operate at a higher and higher level, because that's what we're going to have to do in order for us to really accomplish what we want to do from a business standpoint long term.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept and a really smart way to build a portfolio for yourselves, right? So you're talking about your freedom and how you're going to get there. That's, as a medium to long-term strategy. At some point, I guess you're going to kind of sell those businesses on or move out of them and take the money and use that to retire on, right? Or do whatever you want to do. Go lay on that beach for a couple of months and then start up again, maybe. So, so I guess that's a completely different mindset for people that are traditionally in that employment mode, right? Where, okay, I need to get the income. I need to be working harder so then I can earn more money. So trading, I guess, their time for money. You're instead actually ramping up that value, the money, what you're generating for your time, right? So 1 hour of your time to empower your staff and allow them to go out and build, it's going to generate you X amount of income. Whereas just delivering a report for somebody is going to, what that's going to equate to, don't you? There's no kind of exponential growth to that. It is your day rate, hourly rate, whatever it is. So really interesting. So I know you kind of want to chip in on that one, but I want to kind of tie this into your podcast a little bit now. So
sure.
Listen to a lot of those episodes and they're really, really interesting. You speak to some great founders. One I'd recommend anyone listening to is Brian Scudamore. I think it's really interesting. You only had 30 minutes with him, but you packed a lot in. So that was really cool. You also do these Monday mindset kind of tips and advice on how to kind of get yourself around to thinking like an entrepreneur, right? So what I wanted to ask you about that is, which of those things that you've learned have helped you kind of in your world as a business owner, right? What's the one kind of piece of advice you've kind of taught yourself almost or discovered?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, there's so much, right? I mean, and that's why I did that whole series Mindset Monday on the podcast, because it was like I was, and still am, but like there was a period in my life, kind of right before we started making a lot of the moves that we've made over the last few years to really start building businesses and take more control of our livelihood. There was a period where I think personally I was just going through, a huge growth phase, and I was learning more about what successful people do. And it all came back to mindset, right? And so I think it's absolutely critical for anyone that wants to be an entrepreneur. Like, you gotta work on your mindset, and it's not like a quick fix either, right? I mean, it's just like working out. You go to the gym once, you're not going to see any results, right? You go once a week for a year, you'll see some results. But, if you have good, steady, consistent progress, then the results start to compound over time. So, I've come to learn that mindset is the same. But so I don't know, I guess the best, the biggest lesson I've learned, the best thing I would recommend, it ties into what we were talking about earlier, right? It's that fear is always going to be there. It's how we're wired as humans. So don't try to ignore it. Don't try to pretend like, you're not experiencing fear. Instead, embrace it, but recognize it for what it is, right? Which is just, hey, you're about to get uncomfortable. And so that's scary, right? Well, when do we tend to get uncomfortable? When we're growing, right? You don't grow without getting uncomfortable. You don't get uncomfortable without experiencing fear. And I think when it comes to business ownership, and particularly the biggest fear that most people have is the fear of failure, right? What happens if the business isn't successful? Sure. What happens if I lose everything? What happens if I have to shut the business down? I would be a disgrace, whatever. So much of it ties to failure. So 2 things I'd recommend there. Number 1 is shift your mindset to not be afraid of failure. Brian Scudamore talked about that. It's funny that you brought his episode up. Fail. Yeah, that's his book, Willing to Fail. And it's such an important lesson that you just have to learn and shift your mindset to failure's good, right? Because that means you're trying new things. And if it doesn't work, then at least that approach doesn't work, and you can, shift your focus going forward. And so for me, it's like I just have now come to think of failure as a positive thing. And really, you don't fail at anything unless you give up and you stop trying, right? If you try something and it doesn't work, but you learn from that and you go try it again, that's not failure. That's just learning, right? So I think there's that. And then, the second thing that I would tie into that, I guess, is when it comes to fear, try your best to step back and really analyze, is this fear justified, right? What we tend to do is our minds tend to run wild, right? And make up some crazy scenarios that we're scared of. And the majority of the time, it's vastly overestimated. Like the types of franchise businesses that we deal with, for the most part, if you invest in it and you start it and it doesn't go as well as planned, that may be a temporary setback, but we're not usually talking about like people filing bankruptcy and losing their house. And so anyways, there's, I think a process that anyone should go through to analyze their fear. Where is it coming from? How justified is it? What is kind of the worst case scenario? And what could I do to prevent a worst case scenario? And if the worst case scenario does play out, what can I do to get myself back to where I am today? And when people actually take the time to go through that exercise, for what we're talking about here, business ownership, they usually realize that, okay, one, it's very unlikely that a worst case scenario does play out. There's things I can proactively do to prevent that worst case scenario from playing out. And even if it did, I can still get back to where I am today. And I know how I would do it. So that's I think a helpful exercise for anyone that is kind of getting blocked by fear, especially when it comes to a decision like getting into business for themselves.
Yeah, I guess they just got to get themselves to that point where they're thinking, right, okay, yeah, I might fail, but I'm just going to keep on trying regardless. Yeah. And at some point, I'll make it happen. Like you said it in a much better way there, obviously. But that's ultimately it, isn't it? Getting yourself in that space where you're thinking, I'm determined to make a success of this, and nothing's going to stop me, right? And
yeah, exactly. It's a mindset shift, right? Instead of being afraid of failure, recognize failure for what it is, which is you're learning.
An opportunity to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of the sting out of it too, when you look at it that way. And it does remove some of the fear once you've kind of trained your mind to think about it that way. And like I said earlier, the fear never goes away completely. We were scared with our second franchise, still scary. It was a much bigger investment. We had a second kid at that point, so one more mouth to feed. So it's not like the fear ever goes away. You just learn to embrace it. You learn to recognize it for what it is. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I think you can use it as fuel as well. So the one other thing that I will quickly add in that just I think ties into all of this, because I know this was a huge mindset shift for me, was, like you work with people that are looking at buying franchises. I do too. People tend to focus exclusively on the risk if they do it, right? If I do it, people don't focus enough on the risk they run if they don't do it, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying ignore the risk of doing it, but make sure you don't ignore the risk or the opportunity cost of not making that move and going into business for yourself, because chances are you started this process for a reason, right? Chances are this is something you've put quite a bit of thought in. If you're talking to Ed about ERA, or if you're working with me and we're exploring franchise opportunities, it's probably not on a whim, right? It's probably something you've been putting some thought into, and there's something driving you towards that destination of becoming a business owner. And you need to understand the risks that are associated with going into business for yourself, but make sure that you also understand what you're risking and what you're potentially giving up if you decide not to do it. You're risking that you could be in the exact same place 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. And the biggest thing that I've learned is, we've talked a lot about fear. I'm way more scared of regret than I am of getting uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think that mindset shift is powerful.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that, you see those quotes flying around all the time, right? And in many ways, they kind of, you kind of throw them away and don't think about it until you actually think about it and go, yeah, actually, what do I want in 5 years? Where do I want to be? Do I still want to be in the same role that I'm in? Do I want to be doing the same kind of things? And I think people do that in their careers, right? They think, actually, I want to progress to X, Y, Z level. But what if that's not fulfilling for you in your life? And like you say, if you've already made that decision that it's not fulfilling in your life, well then, yeah, not taking that risk is going to ultimately end up in something is going to happen, which is mediocrity, maybe for yourself and for your own vision of success. But
I think it's something that people regret, and that regret stays with people for a very long time. And that's not what I want. I've learned that. I'd much rather be uncomfortable and failing while I'm growing than sitting back and regretting that I wasn't willing to bet on myself.
Sure, it's good advice, man. Definitely. But look, I know we're running a little bit short on time now, so I've got a few stock questions I want to ask you, but I could talk to you for ages about franchising and kind of your perception on things.
But we'll get you on my show so we can keep the conversation going. How about that?
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I feel like I learned a lot from everybody that I speak to, right? And you're certainly helping me and hopefully some other people that are listening to this. But I've got to ask you now, because I like to find funny stories, right, in everybody's careers, and it's just entertaining to see what comes up. So I'm going to ask you, what kind of funny, weird, or strange stories have you had in your career?
Yeah, so I knew you were going to ask this, and so I spent a few minutes thinking about it. I think one that you'll get a kick out of, because I think you're also going to ask me about, maybe one of my proudest moments. So I'll kind of tie these into one, and that way I get another answer for the proudest moment. But in our Shelf Genie franchise, as I've already mentioned, that's my wife's business, and she's done an amazing job with it. So we do an annual convention every year where all the franchisees get together and the corporate office is there. And on the last night of the convention, they do an award ceremony. And so in our first year, we won the Rookie of the Year award for Shelf Genie. So, we were the top performing franchise in our first full year of business compared to the other franchises that were also in their first year of business. I said we, really my wife run the Rookie of the Year award,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so this is like a running joke inside Shelf Genie, like the CEO who I used to report to when I was doing franchise sales, like the other franchisees, they all love to give me a hard time that, it's Kelly's business and Wes is just kind of the help or the muscle or whatever. So anyways, Andy, the CEO, is up there on stage at this awards banquet, and he's announcing the winner of the Rookie of the Year. And so he calls Kelly up, and he specifically left my name off. And so, I'm kind of sitting there like a little bit confused or whatever. So she goes and starts to walk up there. And so, and Andy played this brilliantly, but he waited until she got all the way up there, and he's like, oh yeah. And Wes. So I guess she can come up. And so kind of had to do like a walk of shame up to the podium or whatever. But everyone got a kick out of that. And my wife still loves to remind me of that story from time to time. But so when I say, Shelf Genie, what we've done in that business, winning the Rookie of the Year is just, one example of the success we've had in that business. That's all my wife, Kelly, and I'm very proud of what she's done with that business.
Well, I don't think you should put yourself down, man, because you've said it a few times where, you're a team, right? You guys work together and got each other's backs. And I think just allowing her to thrive in many ways is a skill in itself, because it'd be tempting for a lot of people to chip in and say, no, you're doing it wrong, do it like this. So don't put yourself down, man. Look, you're part of the team.
It's great. It's great. Like I said, I love watching her do it. And we are a team. There's a lot that I kind of, help out in the background. And like I said, we've kind of learned our roles. Like I'm more of the visionary, and she's the one that can execute. The day to day. And so a lot of what I do is kind of thinking bigger picture, long term, and kind of giving us the general direction that we want to move in. And then she's the one that can come behind and actually put a plan together and execute the plan that's going to, help us connect the dots and get there. So that's been great for she and I to work together in this capacity and really kind of learn how to work well as a team and what we're good at, what we're not good at. And so no, it's fun. We cool. Enjoy it.
I like that they took you down in that way though, man. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It was well played.
It shows there's a good relationship there, which is really cool. So one final question then before I let you go, and that's anybody, and by the way, you've given a ton of advice already for people, but if you could pick just the one most important piece of advice you would give to anybody looking to buy into a franchise brand, what's that one thing?
Yeah. One's tough, but I would say, it comes at the beginning of the process, right? A lot of people, if they decide they want to look at franchises, in my experience, they start the selection process the complete wrong way in terms of what businesses they want to explore. They may say, hey, there's not a good pizza restaurant in my town, so maybe I want to open a pizza place, or I love golf, so maybe I want to open a driving range. It's not usually the best way to find the right business for you. First sit down and really get clear, number one, on why. Like if you don't have a strong why for why you want to own a business, then the chances that you will fail are increased exponentially, because it's hard and it's a roller coaster, right? So if you don't have that why that's really driving you, it's going to be easy to give up. So get clear on that, and then really put some thought into what are your strengths, what are your skill sets, and how do you want to spend your time as a business owner, or at least the majority of your time. And once you're kind of clear on that, that should give you some direction in terms of what businesses are going to be a good fit for you, right? Like you asked earlier if I, grew up wanting to rent cars. No, I also didn't grow up wanting to own a shelving business or an installation business. These are not things that we're passionate about. We're passionate about building teams, creating jobs for people, and providing a superior experience to our clients than they're going to get from any of our competitors. Those businesses allow us to do that, and they cater to our skill sets, right? And so anyways, maybe a long-winded answer, but put some thought into, what types of businesses are going to be a good fit for you, but not starting with the widget, whatever the product or the service is. Do some of that legwork up front. And that's where I start with everyone that I work with in my consulting business. We spend, probably a total of 6 to 10 hours working together to get clear on these things before we ever talk about any specific brands. So anyways, that would be my advice.
No, that makes a lot of sense, just because, perhaps you like animals and, walking your dog and cat doesn't necessarily mean you like, bathing them, clipping their toenails and all that, that sort of stuff, So
exactly.
It makes a lot of sense. And look, Wes, thank you so much for your time today. I kind of wish we had 6 to 10 hours ourselves just to kind of work through everything and then kind of get your take on it all. But thank you so much for what you've shared with us today about your story, your business, and all the advice you've given us. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And have a good day.
Thank you, Ed. Keep doing what you're doing, man.
Cheers. You too. Catch you later, Wes.
See ya.